Hi, I'm Elena Del Cruz, and welcome back to the last episode of Girl Talk. Today I'm here again with Liz Lamb from Counseling Services, and today we're going to talk about self-discovery. So hi Liz, thank you
Hi.
so much for coming to the last episode.
Of course, happy to be here.
So when it comes to the journey of self-discovery, how
Mhm.
would you describe it?
Well, I think it's unique for everybody, so I think everybody's journey is different, but I think that there's a couple key pieces to everybody's journey. The first is to kind of think about, where were you a couple years ago? Where are you today, and where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? I would ask the question too about what do you love? What moves you? What makes you excited? What brings you happiness and joy? And I would think about too, what are your goals? What are your values? I think it's important to kind of look back on the journey thus far, take a minute in the present, and then think about where you're hoping the journey is going to take you.
And with girls today, there are so many negative factors when they're trying to find themselves. What kind of factors do you think play with that role?
I think we've talked about a couple in previous episodes about kind of media, pressure from the society to conform, to fit a certain stereotype. I think sometimes too, other people's opinions and input can be helpful, but also it can be challenging at times as well if it's not beneficial and uplifting. And also, too, sometimes when we think about our self identity and our journey in relationship to the relationships that we have in our lives with family, with friends, sometimes we can get caught up. We have different roles. We're daughters, we're friends, we're cousins, we're girlfriends. But sometimes we have to take a step back from those relationships, not base our identity in those roles all the time, and really look into ourselves and think about kind of where our journey is, where it's taking us, and who we want to be.
And what is your opinion on scenarios when girls try to change their persona in order to conform and to feel accepted and to fit in?
Yeah, I think those words conforming, fitting in, I think sometimes we adapt ourselves in a way that's positive, and I think sometimes we modify or adapt ourselves in a way that isn't so positive. So, kind of thinking about, well, what are we really doing? What are we conforming to? What are we fitting to? Is it fitting into the person, the ideal self of who we want to be? Or is it fitting into somebody to kind of appease somebody else or meet somebody else's expectations? So I think it's important to sit down and think about why you're adapting yourself and modifying yourself. But I agree with you that there's a lot of pressure from outside sources. And sometimes that's when we have to back off, take a second, and think about what we want.
And lastly, how strong and effective do you feel the question, who am I, truly is?
I think it's a really strong question. And I think as college age females, this is a particularly important point to sit down and think about that. Carl Rogers, who was a psychologist, talked about kind of the ideal self, who we want to be, and the real self, who we actually are. And do those things match up? And if they do, you're kind of on the right path. But if they're not exactly matching up, taking a second to think about kind of why they're not matching up. But I think it's a super important question, and I think the earlier you sit down and think about that, I think the better off you are.
Well, thank you so much for answering all my questions, and thank you so
Welcome.
much for always being welcome and willing to come to the show.
Definitely.
So that is all for Girl Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of our last episode of Lady Parts.